English literature revision for conflict and power poetry. Tissue. General advice, don't focus on what you can't do. You're not expected to teach yourself any new material. So you need to use this time to revise and prepare revision materials that will be really useful to you when you get to year 11. Just set yourself 1 or 2 tasks that you want to achieve and do those. Focus on small and then building upwards. Try different activities, so sometimes you might do some online work with Seneca or Sam Learning, you might do some written work the next day, you might make some revision cards another day, so vary it so that you're constantly doing something different, but it's all working towards that same aim. A reminder to use the resources on your shared area, so you can go into the Year 10 Home Learning folder and the Year 11 Revision Aids folder, as well as using online revision aids, Sam Learning and Seneca Learning. But it's really important that you understand each of the 15 cluster poems. BBC Bite Size is a good place to start if you don't have any of the notes with you. Choose one poem to focus on at a time and make sure that you can explain what the poem is about. Link the poem to different themes, select 3 or 4 key quotations from your poem, annotate them and explode them with lots of alternative interpretations, and then create them into revision cards which you can then focus on learning ready for the exam. And to challenge yourself even further, do some wider research into the context of those poems, starting with the British Library. Tissue by Imtiaz Darker. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching. The kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died, where and how, on which sepia date. Pages smoothed and stroked and turned, transparent with attention. If buildings were paper, I might feel their drift. See how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift, in the direction of the wind. Maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. Fine slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold and what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. An architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make, find a way to trace a grand design, with living tissue, raise a structure never meant to last, of paper smoothed and stroked and thin to be transparent, turned into your skin. So a little bit about the poet then. Imtiaz Darker was born in Pakistan. She was raised in Glasgow and now lives in Britain and India. The poem itself resists a straightforward interpretation, but there are some key themes and ideas. So stanzas 1 to 3 talk about the importance of paper as a means of recording our history. Stanzas 4 to 6 focus on the paradox that paper is fragile yet still controls our lives. And the final 13 lines look at creating things, particularly human life. So life is more complex and precious than other things we create, but it's also temporary, and it forms part of a bigger and ongoing story. Homonyms, the same word with different meanings. So homonyms of tissue, it creates a link between paper and humans. Both tissue paper and human tissue are fragile but powerful. And tissue originally meant something that had been woven, and that reinforces the idea that human lives are built up in layers. So if we start looking at the lines of the poem, the line 1 and line 4 both begin with the word paper. That begins our first 2 sentences and draws our attention. It suggests that paper is important and it could drive the change that is hinted at in line 3, could alter things. So there's a suggestion there that things need to change. We've got the word light at the end of line 1 into line 2. Let the light shine through. Light allows things to be seen and not hidden. So perhaps that is what needs to change. Nothing hidden. We've got a reference to the Quran in line 6, the holy book of Islam. That broadens the importance of paper. It can be used to record religious beliefs. Lines 7 and 8, written in the names and histories, who was born to whom. So paper is used to record family history. Whole lives can be summed up by marks on paper. Stanza 3 continues this idea: height and weight, who died, where and how, on which sepia date. So we're thinking of things that are recorded from the past onto paper. Sepia being a brown-grey colour because it's aged. Think about birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, all recorded information onto paper. And then line 11, pages smoothed and stroked and turned. So you've got gentle verbs there and repetition of the word and to show that these pages are treated with respect and affection. It sounds almost like a child and a pet. And then in line 12, they're transparent with attention. And that word attention, that's the last word before the first full stop, emphasising the importance of what's come before. This information on this paper is highly important. The word transparent in line 12 reminds us that the paper is fragile, but also the fact that it lets light through, so it allows us to see the future, to see ahead of things that will change and continue to happen despite what's happened in the past. And then moving on to stanza 4, line 13, if buildings were paper, I might feel their drift. So we've got a shift in tone here. The speaker suggests that people would notice that they were temporary if buildings were paper, because they would be far more fragile. We've got the word drift there in line 14 and the word shift at the end of line 15. So we've got that rhyme there that plays on the idea of movement, because you'll notice that the word drift doesn't fall at the end of the line like the word shift. So it plays with the idea of movement. They appear in different places on the line as if they've been blown by the wind, just like paper could be. Stanza 5 begins with maps 2 on line 17. A short sentence, it's blunt. It might reflect the fixed nature of maps and the borders creating division and not freedom. Then we move on to the sun shines through their borderlines. The sun is a powerful, permanent force, whereas borders are actually just temporary marks on paper and may change over time. It goes on to say the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. We've got alliteration there with the R sound to create that flowing effect and that list to build up the detail and increase that sense of freedom. Moving on to stanza 6 now, line 21 and 22. Find slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold. That refers to receipts that record our day-to-day lives. They can tell a story about our whole existence, but they're still fine slips of paper. They're fragile. We've got enjambment there, the run-on between lines, always using paper in our lives. It really does play a massive part in our lives. And then moving on, line 23 and 24, what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. We've got a simile there that hints at how our lives can be controlled by paper, i.e. money. Stanza 7, line 25 to 27. An architect could use all this. Place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line. So the work of a poet mirrors the work of an architect. The poet builds layers of words and meanings, where the architect designs physical structures. You've got repetition in there of the word over in line 26 and 27. It's repeated 3 times to reinforce that idea of layers. We've got the word luminous in line 26, which links us back to that idea of light and being able to see things clearly. Line 28 into 29, and never wish to build again with brick or block. We've got some consonants here with similar sounds together, emphasising solidity, with the enjambment heightening that impact. The idea that the architect would never want to build with those physical solid objects again, but actually could do the same with words on paper and build up those layers. Line 29 into 30, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, those being large stone statues and columns. We've got a repetition here of the image from line 17 and 18, the idea of the sun shining through, daylight breaking through. Light is enduring and powerful, and it will continue to shine even when man-made structures break. Line 31, the shapes that pride can make. This sounds a little bit like a criticism of human pride. We make big, imposing buildings that are ultimately unimportant. Line 32, find a way to trace a grand design. Grand design, perhaps a pun on the TV programme. But we're shifting now from talking about paper to humans. Humans being a structure far more complex and grand than any building. Stanza 9 now, line 33 into 34. Raise a structure never meant to last. It reminds us that human life is only temporary. And then moving into line 35, of paper smoothed and stroked. We've got repetition there from line 11, reminding us that we're all part of a complex, lasting family history. And then line 36, and thinned to be transparent, also repeated from line 12. Why might that be? What does the transparency refer to? We need to be clear on this. And then finally, line 37, turned into your skin. We've got references to creation in the previous two stanzas, suggest that this could be addressed to a child, or it could be addressed to us, the reader, reminding us that we're all influenced by our heritage. But this line, notice that it's on its own. It's on its own to stand out and to make us think about our own identity. So that's our line-by-line analysis, and just remember that this poem does resist a straightforward interpretation. Okay, so you should now be able to summarise what the poem is about in full sentences. You should be able to annotate the poem with the points that we've discussed and any of your own personal responses and ideas. And you need to be selecting 3 or 4 quotations which you most like the look of and exploding them, remembering to explore lots of connotations of all of those words within each quotation, identifying any obvious techniques and the impact that is designed to have on us as the reader, and then putting those onto revision cards and starting to learn them to practice your memory recall and get you exam ready. So now then, can you say anything about the poem's form? Remember, form refers to how it appears on the page. So I've just given you a little hint there. How does the irregular pattern reflect the themes of the poem? How does enjambment help convey the message of the poem? So in terms of the form, the poetic voice here is elusive. It has focus on humanity in general rather than a specific person or speaker. We've got a lack of regular rhythm or rhyme, and the enjambment across the lines and the stanzas gives the poem freedom and openness, reflecting the narrator's desire for freedom and clarity. We've got short stanzas, which mean the poem is built up in layers, just as it suggests that human life is. The structure of those ideas, we've got 3 main parts: ideas about history, human experience, and creation of human life. And then the final line, which stands out and focuses us on our own identity and how it is created. We've got language in the poem in terms of light being presented as a positive force, enabling people to see and understand, and it has the power to move through and beyond boundaries and break through objects. We've got the idea of creation, lots of references to man-made constructions in terms of buildings and borders, compared with the creation of humans. Now it's time to develop your knowledge and understanding of tissue even further. So do some contextual research. Find out everything you can about the poet Imtiaz Darka and her life, and if there are any connections there to the ideas in this poem. Think about why she has chosen to focus on humanity and identity, and how does the structure and the content of tissue reflect these ideas. Start with the British Library and work your way out from that with your research. Think of answers to these questions too. Why does the poet list details of what families might write on the back of the Quran? Why would an architect never wish to build again with brick? Why is the human body described as a structure? Now we need to start making links. So how and why can this poem, Tissue, be linked to any of the other power and conflict poems in your anthology? Remember, they're all linked by the theme of power and conflict, so now you need to be more specific in making those links. So, for example, this poem clearly focuses on life, humanity, and identity. So which other poems also contain these ideas? So you've got feelings of control. The poem mentions different things that control human life, references to money, religion, nature, pride, governments, capitals. You've got the idea of freedom. The speaker imagines a world that breaks free of some of these restrictions, where human constructions are less permanent and important. So you could link the idea of power of nature over human power with Ozymandias, for example. You could explore family identity and also bring in poppies. You could look at identity and also compare that to checking out the history. And I'm sure you've got other ideas too. So now we can start looking at sample exam questions, so you know what to expect in the summer exam. So here's our question. Compare how identity is presented in Tissue and one other poem from the cluster. So the first thing to do is identify the keywords of that question. So as always, we have to compare, and in this case, our key focus is identity. So now it's time to spend 5 minutes planning your idea. So divide your page in half, put Tissue on one side, and decide which other poem you could compare it with on the other. And then in each of those columns, just bullet point 3 ideas about how identity is presented. And that's your plan. So once you've spent your 5 minutes doing your plan, you then need to move to write your answer. You begin with writing an introduction, explaining how identity is presented in Tissue and your second choice of poem, and that's all your introduction needs to say. And then you move to your first PEA analytical paragraph, remembering your PEA checklist to develop the depth of your analysis, explore multiple connotations of multiple words within your selected quotations and making sure that they're relevant to the focus of the question, so in this case identity. And once you've finished your first PEA paragraph in as much detail as you can, you continue your response, and then your second PEA paragraph will be on your second choice of poem, and you keep alternating between the two and remembering to compare, which means exploring how they are similar and how they are different, and remember your comparative connectives to make that comparison clear. You need to aim for 3 PEA paragraphs on each poem, which means 6 in total in the time allowed, but as always, it's quality over quantity, so that is just a guide. 4 really detailed analytical paragraphs, 2 on each poem, would be fine. And as a guide, a really detailed PEA analytical paragraph would be about 1 side of A4. Once you've worked through your paragraphs in as much detail as you can, you need to round off your response with a conclusion. And this is where you sum up how identity is presented in each of the poems, and then which one you find to be most effective with a reason why. and that will conclude your exam answer nicely and show the examiner that you have finished your response. So here we have the poetry mark scheme. You've got 30 marks in total, and it's divided across the assessment objectives. So assessment objective 1, to demonstrate your understanding of the ideas in the texts, up to 12 marks are available. For assessment objective 2, which is your selecting your quotations and analysing them, again 12 marks are available. And then for assessment objective 3, which is your understanding of the context, 6 marks are available. Okay, so that makes a possible 30 marks available. You need to be concerned with these key words in the mark scheme. Okay, so you can see for a level 6, your answer needs to be convincing, critical, and explore. For a level 5, your answer needs to be thoughtful, developed, considered. Okay. Now, this is where it comes in that your paragraphs need to be really detailed. So you need to say as much as you possibly can about each of your selected quotations. And if you are doing that, exploring the alternative interpretations by closely analysing as many of the words within your quotation as possible, as many times as you can, you are developing your response, and that will move you up the mark scheme. Here we've got the criteria for level 3 and level 4 answers, and you can see for a level 3, which is your 11 to 15 marks, you need to explain and structure your comments. So you need to be using that PEA analytical structure to secure your level 3 and above. And we always tell you to aim for half marks and higher to secure your pass grade. So this is what you have to do. You have to write with the PEA structure in order to elevate yourself from level 3 upwards. Level 4 is showing a clearer understanding, and then as you know, level 5 is where you are developing the detail further. So a reminder to use the resources that are on your shared area in the Year 10 Home Learning folder and the Year 11 revision aids, as well as using online learning platforms such as Seneca Learning and Sam Learning. And GCSE Bite Size, BBC Bite Size, is also a good resource to use. Make sure you work through each of the poems. Make sure that you can explain what the poem is about. Link the poem to different themes, different poems in the anthology. Select your key quotations, annotate them and explode them, put them onto revision cards and learn them, and then do some wider research into the context of the poems. And when you've done all of that, feel free to email your teacher at any time and send pictures of your work and your revision resources so that we can see what you've been getting on with, give you lots of meaningful feedback, and keep moving you forwards to secure your target grades and beyond.